It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
We've been talking about here with this loan stuff, and legislators giving loans. I mean, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, I don't think we need to be policing ourselves. I think we need to bring in someone from the outside or outside rules that police us and watch over us. I don't think any organization, especially one who's elected by the public, it benefits that organization to police themselves. The only way to give confidence to the voters and confidence to the state is to have that external to our body. And to me, Paul, probably the most important part of ethics reform is to redo the way that we select committee chairs and redo the way that we select what committees people are placed on. We've got to change that. I hope we can introduce rule changes that will allow that. And maybe we do it similar to what the Senate does and allowing those positions to be done by seniority.
So talk a little about that and remind us of what happened. So the new speaker is Matthew Shepard. The old speaker is Jeremy Gillum, who's mentioned these new reports about getting that loan of $16,000 from Joe Jett. But there, at the very beginning of the session back in 2017, 17. Yeah. You guys changed the way the speaker appoints committees, and it gave him a lot more power than he had before. Talk about that.
Well, that said it all. I mean, now they appoint not only the committee chairs, but they appoint who's on which committee, which only makes things that you can agree or disagree with giving your fellow legislators loans, which I think ought to be reported. You need to report that and make that public information. But now that only makes that opportunity appear to the public to be more corrupt. When if we would go back and select it more based upon your time in office, when people elect their representatives multiple times to the legislature, that ought to stand for something. That ought to mean something in the legislature when your district has that much confidence in you to return you to office. You ought to move up in the opportunities you have to be a part of leadership, which means chair of a committee, co-chair of a committee, on the committees that you want. And right now, that's just not going to be the case. We're going to have one legislator appointing all of those. And I just think we need to reform that.
Okay, so if you're essentially what I hear you saying is, when you don't go by the seniority, concept, it really just could be potentially some freshman legislator who's got the right special interest backing them, the right money behind them, could end up, leapfrogging over everybody else and, being rewarded because of that, because you do have the authority is in one person's hand. And honestly, with the appointment of Joe Jett here, there is some a lot of questions now because you got $16,000 when he was a Democrat.
And that's just at least the appearance of that, whether it's true or not true.
Right.
But to give that appearance is just the wrong thing to convey, especially right now at this time to our voters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. It's always great to have him on, and I appreciate you, getting up with us and being here.
I do every morning.
I know you do. But you talk about the dog hair in the studio, so maybe I insinuate that maybe you sleep in sometime, Dan. All right, so tell us a little bit about. We had a good debate last time. I felt like on issue 3 in term limits. We replayed it several times, on our Paul from the Past that we do on the online broadcast and everything else. So have you changed your mind and decided to admit that the term limits is a good thing, or are you still saying that need to stay where it is?
It actually did cost me to think a lot more, which is always a good thing.
Good.
But I became more firm in my position.
Okay.
But I thought, what does this actually mean to the voters of District 53? How would term limits help them? And as I thought more about that, I thought even more broadly in terms of Northeast Arkansas. Our form of government has always been based on the power of persuasion. And we've always thought if we could educate the voter and educate the people, they will certainly have more conservative views. And I think that was the intent of our founders. our opponents, the Democrats and the more liberal folks, they depend on the courts. And if they can't win by the power of persuasion, they can't win by education, they just make a law. And I think that's kind of what's going on right here. You know, the people in Northeast Arkansas haven't needed term limits. If you'll remember, several years back, we had a legislator who violated the law, and we had a local person, Bob Hester, found out about that and brought that to the public's attention, brought it to the Ethics Commission. It ended up in court, and that legislator was removed. We had multiple Democrat legislators in Northeast Arkansas. Matter of fact, the four people who represent Northeast Arkansas now, those were all held by Democrats who voted for abortion, who voted against voter ID and voter laws. The voters of Northeast Arkansas, when I and my fellow Republican legislators decided to run, and we went house to house and we pointed out what those voting records were. We educated the public, and once the public was educated, that motivated them to get out and vote. So we not only had a motivated electorate, we had an educated electorate, and we did not need term limits. The voters took that action, and the voters were the ones that brought about term limits through the vote. And so I think in those terms, how would it benefit the people of Northeast Arkansas? This ballot issue would not benefit them. The people of Northeast Arkansas have taken that upon themselves, and they have done what our Constitution sets out to do. I know you have listeners all over the state, and I hope they will consider too whether this ballot issue will change the way they vote. You know, the people, and let's look at the other side of that, you have to look at who opposed me. You know, my opponent, Dr. Cole Peck.
All right, so to rehash here, you just won a Republican primary.
Yeah, he's no longer my opponent.
No longer your opponent, but he just want to let everybody know, we're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. He's from District 53, which is in Northeast Arkansas. And essentially, I mean, it was an establishment-backed,
right.
And you have one of the most conservative voting records in the state of Arkansas. I just want to remind everybody of that. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. And the people who opposed me were very favorable to term limits. I mean, they wanted to get me out any way they can. And matter of fact, my opponent raised over $100,000 which is very unusual in a House race. And I think in the previous election, in the 2015 election, I think Brant Smith ran against an opponent, a Democrat opponent, who raised about $100,000.
Yeah.
So those folks are very favorable to term limits. But the push for term limits for my position came outside of my district. They're the ones that donated the money. They're the ones that found an opponent for me to oppose me. They're the ones who pushed all of this, came from outside the district. So there again, I think when you look at that, you have people statewide who maybe they want a legislator out of office, but they're not in their district.
Okay, so you're saying, just to be clear, you're saying you oppose this particular issue 3 coming up that's going to take it from 16 years to 10 years because of the consent of the governed argument. You're saying,
correct.
Okay. So continue. I just wanted to be clear that that's what your argument.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that for the listeners, because that's exactly right. I mean, if the people in my district choose for me to run consecutive terms, who are the people outside of my district? Why should they have the power to tell the people in my district I can't represent them, that they have to find someone new? Again, because the people of my district haven't needed term limits. They've voted people out or taken legal action to take people out.
Well, I will tell you this: the friends that I have who are not for the new term limits law that's going to take it from 16 to 10 years, that's one of the things that they say is, if 10 years is too short, the reason this thing is on the ballot is because we don't have enough people engaged. We don't have enough people who are educated. That's one of their arguments. And that a lot of this stuff would be stopped if people would have just gotten out, and gone and voted, and that sort of thing. Let me ask you this. Would you be in favor? Because other people are saying that Arkansas doesn't have a recall law. There's no way to recall a state representative or state senator. And some people are saying that maybe, I'm just saying this is what the arguments are, that, if 10 years is somehow too short, which I don't think it is, that's just my position. Current is 16. There does need to be some method. I mean, for example, the people of Fort Smith who are listening on the Marshall right now, I mean, you guys could have had a recall election for now convicted felon Jake Files long before he ever pled guilty, because, I mean, the stuff in the media was obvious, the news stories that were coming out, and then but the people have had no recourse there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree. I mean, if we want to have a law come forward to allow for a recall, of course, we'd have to look at what the details of that are.
Yeah.
But absolutely, the people, it's up to the will of the people. It's up to the power of legislators and the people to win the argument through persuasion. And when you have legislators who clearly are not representing their people, then there needs to be a mechanism to remove them from office. Again, we'd have to look at the detail of what that is.
Just the
but
concept.
The concept is worthy, I think.
And I know also that it could be, obviously politicized and used in at times when it was just, we could get ridiculous.
Well, it is now. I mean, you look at what's happening in the federal level with Judge Kavanaugh. It's gotten to the point of ridiculous. We have a gentleman, Ray Hackworth, here in town, who filed, I think, 5 or 6 ethics complaints that, in my opinion, are very frivolous. I'm having to defend myself against one now, and I think it's going to come out positive for me.
Well, and that's as a result, though, of your primary and how, how I would just say nasty one side ended up getting, because they wanted the establishment Republicans. They wanted to get you out of office.
Yeah, and of course one of those reasons is I opposed issue 1.
Yes.
And my former opponent, Dr. Peck, who represents the medical society, who is supported by the medical society, I should say, they are all against issue 1. And
or 4 issue.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They are for issue 1.
No, it's fine.
But again, that's one of the reasons you have people who are conservative, as I am, who are willing to stand strong, to stand up in the face of that and win, and then we're going to term limit them out. And I'll go back to the point you made about it takes time to learn how to operate in Little Rock. It's a good thing that it takes time, because there's a tremendous amount of education that has to go on. I'm on the education committee now, and that education budget is incredibly complex. And I'm just now learning how to do that. I'm also the chair of the Legislative Audit Subcommittee on Medicaid. And Paul, I'm digging into some things right now I wish I could share.
Really, you can't share them?
Not right now, but I may be back later this week. But I'll give you an example. This is public knowledge. It ran in the Democrat Gazette that Arkansas does a match where we match our Medicaid roll to the roll of other states, called a Paris match. Just like the city, we do a Paris match to see which of our citizens are getting Medicaid in multiple states. We match that, and then we can track that down. We found, I think it was about 30,000 people hit that match in 2017. We have not run that match in 2018 for 2 quarters. I think it's August before we ran the match. So if you think that there are people receiving dual benefits in multiple states, and we're paying $600, close to $600 a month, we're talking about millions of dollars here, and we haven't done that. And I've asked why we haven't done that, and just finally got the reason behind that. I heard they said it was a glitch. And I said, so what does glitch mean? They said, well, there's a computer error. What's the computer error? Why is the computer error? Who looked into that?
Yeah.
Who's following up on that? All those follow-up questions, we still don't have answers to that, and several others. But it takes time to learn the detail, and it takes multiple years in the legislature to develop the relationships where I have people and other legislators who will push hard for me. So that's the good side of legislative relationships.
And you know, and I don't dispute that at all. So I would just ask, let me switch to me here. I would just ask, what about the, what about the corruption? I mean, we do see that a lot, and I know not all of you guys are that way, but I mean, there are some people that think, and I tend to think this, that yeah, maybe the term limits is a good idea, going from 16 down to 10 years, because a lot of people are going to go home that are involved right now, and almost it's a cover up, you know, and the people are like, we're sick and tired of. The same faces that are presiding over the same corruption and making constant excuses for it. I mean, you're not making excuses for it, but there are others that are.
Sure. And, I think, you run a clip, I forget who I think it might be a Reagan clip when your show starts out, that we have to endure some temporary.
Yeah. That was an old intro. Milton Friedman,
Friedman
put up with temporary evils, knowing that if you step in and do something about them, you not only may make them worse, but you'll spread your tentacles and get bad results elsewhere.
Well, I kind of think that's an example here. I mean, we have people are going to jail. However, the system caught them. Now, we may not like that it happened, but we have to say, yes, the system is working. We have people that are going to jail. We have stories like this most recent one that will be investigated. You had the Speaker of the House now, Matthew Shepard, who is looking for legislation to improve this. So we are taking steps. People are being held accountable, and it's a short-term, hopefully it's a short-term temporary thing. However, we're getting ready to amend our Constitution. That's a tentacle that's going to spread out, and I think we'll have negative results down the road when we start taking good legislators out of office because our term limits is so restrictive.
State Representative Dan Sullivan, we get just a little bit of time left. Issue 1, the tort reform, there's a lot of opposition against this. I've been seeing some poll numbers. I think the people are figuring out that this is not a good thing, and that it's not the kind of tort reform that, when Republicans talk about tort reform, this isn't it. And you voted against it, from bringing us to this point, because you recognized early on that this wasn't good for the people of Arkansas.
Again, I think, thank you, first of all, because I was one of the original legislators, or the first few to step out and say this is not good legislation. And if you want to have tort reform, it can't look like this. And yes, we are gaining as people, again, you look down when people are educated, when we use the power of persuasion, we talk about our ideals, we talk about our principles, those win in the long run. It's not been a case that we've had to make law or change our Constitution in order to get our way. I say take the voters out, educate the voters, educate people on what our freedoms are, and in the long run, we're going to win.
All right, State Representative Dan Sullivan, it's always great to have you on, sir. And I can't wait for some developments. If you have more news to talk about, I'd love to have you back on soon.
Well, I'll come and talk whichever the results are. The people need to know.
Okay.
We share that information with our folks.
Okay. All right, folks, we're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We will be back in just a moment.